It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 519 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record, where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. Now, if you'd like to see the show notes for this episode, go to andypaul.com/519. There you'll find a time-stamped breakdown of this and all the conversations on Accelerate. So if you're listening and heard a point you want to go back and check out in more depth later, here's the place to do it. andypaul.com/519. Now, if you like this show, it would really help us out if you subscribed, left us a review. You can do that all with the podcast app on the phone you're using to listen to this podcast. So go ahead, hit pause, subscribe, leave us a quick review. We really want to know what we can do to make this a more valuable experience for you. And then come right back. I'll be waiting for you. Joining me on the show for the first time is Andrew Sinclair. Andrew's the founder of Lane 4. Lane 4 is an account-based sales and marketing application which bridges the gap between marketing automation and Salesforce.com. So we're going to talk about account-based marketing. And even though ABM is an account-based strategy, we're also going to talk about what Andrew sees as the importance of leads in ABM. So Andrew Sinclair, welcome to Accelerate.
Thank you.
So where are you today? You're in Canada?
Yes, based in Toronto, but kind of home away from home is the Bay Area. I just got back from about a 2-week trip there.
Home away from home. So ever tempted to come join America?
Sometimes. It's nice. It's nice to visit. Political scenarios, political circumstances aside. It's nice to get down there and we've toyed with it a little bit here and there, putting down. But we found that the majority of the work we can do from anywhere. So
all right, so let me jump right into it. So I've got sort of standard question I ask a lot of my guests here at the beginning of the show is, in your mind, I mean, you're in the sales space. I mean, what's the single biggest challenge you find sales reps, sales professionals facing today? So
the biggest challenge that I'll separate it between reps and management.
Sure, that's fine.
And I think it's still there's still that tension between management kind of having we need to know what's going on in the field kind of question. And I still get that a lot. Basically, a lot of our work is to support strategic sales operations. And inside that, you get a lot of we just need to know this, we need to track this, we need to forecast this and whatnot. And those are still the general challenges from the management side. And I still think that there's that overall difficulty on the rep side of just feeling like you just got to go into systems and just bang in all your stuff, right? And you got that, and you still have that debate between how much time should be selling and how much time should you just be doing your administrative stuff. So being kind of an ops guy, as you can kind of see from the answer there, it's
yeah. I didn't hear the word customer in there anywhere. So yes, you're a sales ops guys. Yeah. But I mean, it still is a fundamental issue, I think, and we're going to dig into CRM as we come up. But it's also, I think, this perception still is, I think you're alluding to, of reps are seeing CRM as a burden and management seeing it as sort of a command and control tool.
Yeah, and I think that that's still the case. And I think you can see it in the subtle terms and the words that people use. When management's doing nothing but using words like track and report and measure and whatnot, it's really not trying to sort of facilitate or try to make things a lot easier for, say, a rep. So, for example, what I like to try to do is try to follow kind of end of job approaches to things. So if we can give sales rep the ability to cut a sales order in 2 clicks, then you can use that interaction to record a whole bunch of data. So now the perspective is a little bit different. Now the rep's not actually entering data; they're cutting a sales order, which they need to get out to their customer. Right. So it's those kind of mind shifts and perspectives that we try to apply to things, but unfortunately, still don't always happen. Right?
Yeah. So what do you think is sort of the one behavior that has to change that in this regard that would make a difference on both management and the individual contributors' part?
Sure. I think the challenge is trying to get systems and technology to facilitate what people do. And I know that on this podcast, you talk a lot about sort of getting ROI out of tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of the challenge, is that we stick tools in front of people and we kind of expect it to just kind of work. And I think that's the biggest challenge of facilitating, right? Because tools really work to facilitate what someone does. And if they're just stuck in front of people, they don't always do anything. And we ultimately dissolve back into this granular idea of just track your stuff, right? And that's where we end up at. And that's what management really wants. So
yeah, I think part of the issue though too is what we want the tools to do is to support somebody else's vision other than sales of what it is they should be doing, right? And to me that seems like that's always sort of at odds a little bit. You know, the sales rep says, well, hey, this is the process we should be using to selling. This looks more effective, but you know, we're setting up this process in our tools that says, no, we do it this way. And it seems like we lack alignment that way oftentimes.
Yeah, I think there is. And I think especially you see that in a highly scaled type company where they grow really fast. And then you get, you know, the separations between sales management and the actual field starts getting bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about your company, Lane 4. So tell us about Lane 4. What was the impetus to start this company?
Yeah, so Lane 4 itself is based on my consulting company that I've been running for several years now. The consulting side, we primarily focus on supporting funded startups. So that's where I say sort of the Bay Area is the home away from home. Support a whole slew of companies out there. And we've been following a lot of pattern processes that people had. So 4 years ago, we started building out tools that would just help people use Salesforce and just kind of make it easier to use and whatnot. Lo and behold, those were the things that people are calling ABM today.
When you're saying make it easier to use, in what dimension?
So when I mean easier to use, I mean we'll get into these sort of conversations, but like what's a lead and a contact and an account and all this data, and it sits around there, and there's, you know, we try to keep it. We were implementing approaches for, say, marketers to report on influence on, say, an opportunity, or we've got, you know, use cases where we try to do things like, instead of have to have someone just manually click on stuff, we try to infer things from various other actions. You know, these sorts of automated processes just to make Salesforce a little easier and a little less cumbersome and a little, you know, a burden. So inside that spawned the idea of this Lane 4 package, which does things like account-based lead routing. So the emphasis of that was not actually an account-based anything. It was really just, you had a trade show list, right? You got customers on a trade show list. We want to filter them out. You want to make sure that if you got some named accounts, the lead goes to that person. These are the types of problems we were solving, you know, several years ago. And today, they've been rolled into this one sort of umbrella package, which we're calling Lane 4. Designed to make implementing an ABM strategy much easier. Due to the suite of tools that are in there. Okay.
Well, let's back up just a second. So, yeah, it seems like the function of a lot of the new sales technology tools that come on the market really sort of play this role of I don't know, they're a layer that sits on top of Salesforce that in many respects make it easier for the individual rep and individual contributor manager even to interact with Salesforce, right? And you've sort of taken what I understand is really a different approach in terms of not having a bolt-on application, but more writing within a native Salesforce app. Now, tell people what the difference is there.
Sure. So we fundamentally feel from our core that the account, and when I say account, I mean sort of capital A, Salesforce account record kind of idea. And that's your system of record for your account-based strategy, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where you've gone out to various sales tools. You've discovered where these, you know, your top 100 or your top 5,000 or whatever the number is, and they now reside there, and that's where they're mastered. So when you start getting into scenarios like trying to pull that information into something that layers on top, creating a play that may or may not be even in Salesforce, all this kind of stuff, you end up with these disjointed scenarios where you don't really know what's going on within that organization and that account you're trying to target, which defies a lot of the logic that you're trying to get to with an account-based strategy. So, for example, the reason being bolted sort of in the guts inside Salesforce tries to solve scenarios like I had a good working session with someone yesterday, where the problem was she was trying to figure out what is marketing's influence on an opportunity, the big major account. What was the SDR's activity going on within the big major account? So how many meetings were they booking, et cetera, et cetera. The original deal came from a partner channel, which has nothing to do with ABM kind of ideas. From partner channel is the original deal. The SDR actually prospected a subsidiary account, and then the deals got rolled into one. And then the AE owned the whole thing, right? So these kind of real world use cases need to be solved in various ways. And then you kind of have to build your tools within that ecosystem of information to still be relevant to scenarios like that one.
And why couldn't some of the others, what I call the bolt-on tools, why couldn't they handle that?
Well, they can. They just attempt to write to the system kind of. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you end up with every time you have a new data set, you've got new challenges to maintain these data sets. So if you've got so for example, there's some marketing systems are popping up with their own kind of idea of accounts. And that's really no longer the system of record for an account, right? So as soon as one of those accounts becomes, say, a customer, well, Salesforce is the one that knows they're a customer. And if that information is still sitting in some other tool, well, that tool now has to find out they're a customer. So you got a lag effect that ends up happening that just is, let's just say, it's not as efficient as it could be, and then causes some problems of things like, well, sending an email to a prospect that's actually a customer.
Okay. All right. So I thought what sort of interesting observation you had, and something you'd written about sort of the conclusion I drew from it was that, if you're an organization, you've got a Salesforce instance and you're layering these tools in your stack on top of it, that you're looking at Salesforce serve as just a utility as opposed to you call it the core engine of your organization. It seems like a pretty significant difference in perspective. Well,
that's that debate I was mentioning earlier about the tracking database. When it's nothing but a tracking database and you just go put your stuff in there. Well, yeah, it's just a utility, right? You plug it into some data and you're pulling it out and whatnot. But what we're on the consulting side of our business, we're really proud of some of the organizations we worked with where we've been able to establish a really tight lineage between what marketing activities look like, and they're able to use that as a core source of information. And then that can flow right through to being able to cut that sales order through one click because all the data is there. Maybe you're enriching it through some data provider, so now you're not actually typing in that information. Now you're able to cut the sales order out. Now you're able to then flip that to invoicing. Either that's a third-party system, or we've worked with some of the actual accounting tools that are built right in Salesforce.
Like
So when all of a sudden it becomes that beating heart of the entire organization, it's really that thing that everyone looks to manage the organization. And rather than just trying to stick a bunch of information in there because some management person told them they had to do that.
Got it. All right. So you say there's sort of 4 prototypical processes that you really help manage. So first one is lead assignment, or a group of things: lead assignment, account matching, time to follow up. So we sort of talked about lead assignment a little bit, but why don't you get into it a little bit more and then tell us how you really help with how that leads to improved follow-up time.
Yeah. So we also believe on the management side, we also do believe what gets measured can be managed. So what a lot of people are starting to do, and we're starting to see things like 5-minute SLA type policies coming out to SDR teams for marketing, these sorts of things, right? So we need to be able to figure out that lead, and we'll get into the idea of what's a lead and what's an account and what's a prospect and all this kind of stuff in a bit. But assuming we've got some sort of lead and assuming we can actually get it to the right rep, well, now we want to put some onus on that rep to do something, right? Marketing's done their job and they've created that MQL. It's now there. So now, hey, I want to know how long it took you to actually do something with that record. And whether that's, firing that through an SDR sales tool, just what did you do to actually make sure that you engage with that person that showed up?
And so how are you capturing the time on that?
Well, we just, it's that, and that becomes that's what I mean by we're kind of under the cover system where we want to just make it easy. So we will grab the time that happened. We'll then take a look at the business, the business hours of that SDR, make sure that SDR isn't, if the lead comes in at midnight, we don't expect them to just, send an email at 12:01 at night. They're going to do that in the morning. So we'll track those things in business hours.
But you'll do that automatically. So that information then is reportable back to a manager. Say, look, this is our average follow-up time, for instance, on a lead that comes to let's say an inbound lead that comes to an SDR.
Oh, absolutely. Without question. I mean, we fundamentally believe that you should not ask a person to do anything if you can track it automatically.
Yeah, and I was sort of digging at a second point, which is that for all these things that you're asking people to do, is that you're going to measure how long it takes them to do it.
Yeah, and I think that there's a just like marketing people have this idea of every single piece of data you have in a form is kind of like currency. So every piece of information you want from someone, you have to have more value on the other side. So we think that if we're going to surface up, piece of a lead or something like that to you very, very quickly, well, now we're going to have some expectations that you do something with it. Now there's going to be some expectations that you're going to close it out. And then that gives us the tracking need and gives you that, that hot lead really fast.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the second thing you talk about is account creation, and you talk about that fitting into your segmentation models. So again, dive into that just a second.
Yeah, so that's that's the pillar of account-based strategies, right? Is to understand target accounts, then to have a model around that to say, hey, these are the organizations that fit what we're doing, whether that's sort of a predictive algorithm, if you will, around related accounts, or if that's just raw heavy lifting of saying, hey, we're good with this employee size in this industry and so on. We want to make sure those are there, and then we want to surface up enough information so that sales operations can do things like, hey, how many customers do we have in the Bay Area, and what does that really look like? And how many customers do we have on the East Coast and the West Coast? And allowing people to start making good decisions on things like, should we have more reps on the West Coast? Should we just put one rep in all of Canada, which I know people still do. This kind of stuff. So being able to actually,
well, hey, there aren't that many people there, right? That's what they're saying.
No, I know. We're not the population of California. No.
Right. So it must be as easy to get around all of Canada as it is all of California.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, 3,000, 4,000 miles notwithstanding. Yeah. Okay. And then opportunity creation. It seems like this is one you think is the most important.
Yeah, and this is where you get into the heart of the different reporting models and forecasting models of organizations. And when you're looking at, and that's really subjective to how the organization does things. I think what's kind of interesting about what Salesforce is doing is you're starting to see a little bit more standardization as people are being drawn to, their CPQ tools, and there's a bit more standardization now with how people are managing things, especially when you get to things like MRR and ACV and all this kind of stuff. I think it is always interesting to look under the covers and realize that Salesforce as a product sells widgets better than they sell subscription services. Mm-hmm. When Salesforce themselves were a subscription service. So it's always one of those interesting quirks of a company that makes a product doesn't always use the product in the way they need to. So it's about making sure that system does generate the forecasting and the data that you expect.
Well, and so one of the key things that you talk about up front that seems like it is an issue, and I've seen at companies, is having a shared definition of what an opportunity is.
Yeah. So one of the things that you got to figure out is is your opportunity a meeting? Some people will just be it starts at a meeting. Right. And sometimes people are saying, well, it actually starts at you've had
a demo, let's say,
advanced scores and things like that are all achieved and whatnot. So just understanding what that is something that needs to permeate its way back through the whole organization. Because if marketing is going to say, hey, look, we created all these opportunities, well, that's got to be in the context of what an opportunity actually is.
So when you're working with organizations, and what does that process look like in terms of helping them define what constitutes an opportunity that they can all agree on?
Well, I think that goes back to what you're actually measuring. Because if you're a type of organization where you've got a tighter sales cycle, it's going to last, 6 to 12 weeks or something like that, you're probably going to have a very early cycle kind of opportunity that's going to say, we know that we're going to close 12% of our meetings are going to turn into actual deals. So that's your frame of reference in terms of what you're going to pack into an opportunity. Well, that's kind of where we need to start. If you're the type of organization where, we're looking more like it's a 12-month type timeline, well, you probably need some other data points in there. Well, you're going to have multi-touch. You're going to have 16 meetings. You're going to have different meetings with various stakeholders. So you get a lot into very meeting management type stuff, where you need to record those kind of engagement and touch points and next steps and what have you to know that it's actually progressing in a direction that you're hoping. Now, there's a lot of tracking things I just said there, which is tough, especially when the deal cycles get longer and then you're expecting reps, put stuff in there. But
and that's a critical question though. Is so how do you track that, especially when it gets longer? Because we know a couple things happen. The longer the deal gets and the more complex it gets, is that processes become less well defined, the steps taken, stages become less distinct and less relevant perhaps to the deal than they were in something that's more tightly defined, like a 6-week sales cycle. So how are you helping companies in that regard sort of track that? And time is a key factor of that, right? So the amount of time that's being invested, really, to me, I'd want to know that, because to me, ultimately, that's the real driver of productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a bit of a holy grail of sales ops measurement of where reps are actually spending their time and if they're spending them on deals or not. Hasn't yet happened. I'm thinking there may be some predictive engine out there at some point that will take all your Google Calendar data and start figuring out what you're actually doing, and relate that to the actual deals. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist yet. So I think I'm also a bit of a pragmatist when it comes to these things, and there's some good old fashioned just sales that gets involved in there too, and good old fashioned just weekly sales meetings to go over your commit pipeline, then go over what you've got in your forecast and all this kind of stuff. I think we gravitate sometimes to tools are going to solve our problem, and I've seen like the number of sales process methodology tools that I've been presented to over the years are they're crazy. There's dozens, there are hundreds of them.
Hundreds, literally, yes.
Yeah, and the challenge with them is they all try to be predictive. They all try to just sort of tell you, and they ignore the fact that sometimes it just takes good old fashioned weekly meetings and go through your funnel and just make sure it's looking good and track your next steps.
Well, but that's like heresy these days, right? I mean, it's we've got all this data. The data must be predictive.
I know, and I think that what we really need to keep in mind when we're talking about systems is adoption curves, right? Like, what are you actually going to get adopted? And I think that some of the predictive analysis tools kind of lost sight of that. And then what you ended up with, and I've implemented these myself, what you end up with is a predictive score field on an account or an opportunity that doesn't necessarily mean anything to anybody. It's just something that, say, a marketing person said, hey, we want to know kind of the predictive score of an account, so we'll target more of those. But then nobody paid any attention to actually realize that number was right. Right? So we buy the tools, we drop them in there, and we don't really follow up on them. We don't really care about their adoption. And then we end up resulting back to good old-fashioned sales, which is just that weekly meeting and let's look at our pipeline and see how things are going.
Well, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, absolutely not. And I think that's part of that ROI conversation as well, about where some of these tools fall down, is that they don't necessarily track a clear day-to-day what someone is actually doing in their day, and try to achieve that something better than a weekly sales meeting can actually get you.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting, this whole topic of data and the predictive power of predictive analytics, because there's an anecdote coming that was in the new book that was written about Hillary Clinton's campaign called Shattered, and talking about how the campaign had basically been run by political technocrats, if you will, or technologists, who had complete faith in the data and the model and the algorithms to predict the future, and completely discounted sort of the human aspect of it, right? Intuition, instinct, experience, and so on. And the authors are saying, the dangers is that data oftentimes translates into authority, and authority becomes certitude, and that therein lies the problem.
I tend to agree, and especially when you look at something like a high growth startup, take the prototypical sort of B2B high growth startup that we're all sort of talking about when we're talking about ABM models, and you actually take a step back and you realize their total opportunity volume is like 2,000 records or 3,000 records. Mm-hmm. And then you equate that with someone like, a presidential campaign where you're dealing with 30, 40, 60 million data points, right? And they still got
it wrong.
Yeah, and they still get it wrong, right? And I think that we have to be careful on the operation side not to get too enamored into the consumer style predictive analytics into small data sets. And what are very small data sets? Obviously, when you grow and you become a big Fortune 500 company and you're running divisions and you got thousands of ops a month, these things become more statistically relevant. But we can't lose sight of the fact that sometimes we're not actually dealing with as much data as we think.
Well, and to me, the other part of it is not just the size of the data sets, but the fact is that, what we're doing is we're drawing this from humans that, are hugely unpredictable, right? I mean, there's books written about, how we misinterpret the data we get, based on our interactions with humans and things they do. And I just, always a little nervous about, taking sometimes even large data sets like political campaigns. And this example of Hillary Clinton's campaign is perfect story about that is, they had millions of data points. And at one point they talk about in the book, Bill Clinton said, given the impact of what was going on with Brexit, I think we should add a few points onto where we assume Trump is in his poll numbers. And sort of the rise of populism. And the data people said, no, data doesn't support that. So, no. And we'll go down this path with our tactics. And it turned out to be, there are other factors, obviously, but that led to, part of the sort of disastrous outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if you've got to have that good old-fashioned sales when you're dealing with systems. You got to remember there are people using these systems. And then if you're going to base your predictive algorithms on engagement with an opportunity, well, you better have some engagement data to pull from. I think for better or for worse, one of the reasons I've been a big fan of the SDR tools is while they're increasing the amount of volume of email coming out of SDR teams to crazy levels, it's finally allowed us to have reliable sort of engagement data on the Salesforce side, without having them to log everything. Because if it's just automatic, well, all of a sudden now we have a lot more information to identify, right? And now we can figure out who's a better SDR than someone else. Now we can figure out if this is actually a really good meeting because we've got some history behind it. And I think those are the kinds of tools I'm mostly interested in because if you look at the rapid adoption of those kind of tools, is because they really hit that mark of what people actually need to do with the stuff and the information that we actually wanted to always have on the Salesforce side, but could never get to because we required reps to go in there and click a button and type some notes and et cetera, right?
Yeah. So I think the only thing that's not the only thing, but one of the things that's unanswered, though, about these tools are, if you had to do it without the tools, would you have different outcomes?
Yeah, and I think that's a difficult thing to do, right? Because in business, we don't tend to actually A/B test scenarios. You don't really put 8 SDRs and don't give them the SDR tool, and you have 8 SDRs and you give them the SDR tool and you figure it out 6 months later. Unfortunately, it'd be great if we could do that, but it just, for whatever reason, people don't seem to have that kind of testing discipline within organizations, right?
Yeah, or vision, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's. And one of the anti-patterns, and this I truly believe, because I know you're a big proponent of the sort of sales tech and whatnot needs consolidation, and I think there's definitely been an anti-pattern that's popped up in the space where you do get this, throw a tool in there, let people look at it, let people use it, and then all of a sudden there's a better SDR tool and everyone's migrated over there, and let's just go use that one now. And I think that those kinds of patterns are problematic, to say the least, because it does create that scenario of, just at a baseline, unreliable data sets. Like you're no longer tracking the same thing between tools. Now you don't have the same you don't have consistency anymore.
Right.
You're moving your people around all the time, right? You're telling them, oh, we're using this data provider. And then 3 weeks later, you're on another one. And then you're on some forecasting tool, which some people liked. And then you're on another one, and now the numbers are slightly different. And I think that it creates a lot of chaos when operational models really do need to be fairly consistent, and adapting them, takes time.
Yeah, or even at a more micro level. I mean, so you sort of start at the macro level, and with the examples you just gave, but you start working down to, okay, well, you've got a team of 10 SDRs, and 5 of them are spending a lot of time personalizing each of the messages that goes out, and 5 aren't. Right. So it's even at that level, we get, the way the tools are being used by the individuals has a huge impact on the data set as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we haven't really got disciplines yet to figure out which ones of those are being personalized and which ones are not. And we don't yet have the tools and whatnot to then see what the downstream impact of that is. We're just kind of doing gut analysis around that at this point.
Yeah. All very interesting. Well, Andrew Sinclair, we've run to the end of the show, so tell folks how they can find out more about Lane 4 and connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So find me on LinkedIn. It's the best place to get me, Andrew Sinclair. There's a lot of us out there, so you might have to poke around a bit.
After the backslash, is it just Andrew Sinclair? Or?
Yeah, it should be. Okay. And then otherwise, look us up on lane4data.com and find out about what we're doing in the product.
Okay. And if people want to connect with you, just LinkedIn?
Yeah, or just easiest way is just Andrew at lane4data.com.
Perfect.
LinkedIn's great.
Perfect. All right, Andrew, thank you very much. Friends, thank you for spending this time with me again today. Come back, join me again tomorrow. Actually, 7 days a week. We got something for you here on Accelerate. Until then, thanks for joining me. And until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.